videos 9 and 10 we're going to combine to look at the transmission pump itself, the gear, several of the seals, and the input shaft.
Here we got the transmission pump. This is the complete life of the system. Without this fluid pump, none of this hydraulic motion would be possible, and you could not achieve any gear ratios with this type of transmission. It's a gear type pump, picks up fluid, and sends it through passages, and makes hydraulic pressure. Similar to taking your old tractor with hydraulics on it and moving the bucket. Same principle. We're going to remove this. Show you what's inside. Always put a hand underneath and support the pump, because when you remove the last screw, the body itself will actually fall. And then, once all the screws are out, we can take the stator out and expose the pump gears. This is a gear type pump, or what Chrysler calls it is a crescent pump. And what it does is take in fluid, say on this side, and it compresses it as these gears spin around, and hydraulic pressure exits on the other side. It's under high pressure, and it's regulated as well. Now these gears, they have to come out a certain way, and they have to go back in exactly as they came out. So we'll pull up on the center gear, set it aside, and you have to put it back in the way it comes out. Next is the driven gear, and you'll see a notch or a punch mark. Remember how that come out, because sometimes they're facing up, sometimes they're facing down, depending on how they were machined. Stick your gears together, and really there's not much to a gear driven pump other than you want to look for bad wear marks, you want to look for scoring, any kind of heat, any kind of warping, any kind of chips. It's cast iron. It looks really good actually. And here's your converter bushing, which your torque converter rides on in here. It looks very well also. Now this takes a special tool to remove and install this bushing, like the one in the hub we showed you a little bit ago. If we flip the pump over, which is just the body of it, we have the torque converter seal. We got a new one in the kit, so we're going to knock that out and go between the pump bushing and behind the seal, and we can drive it out that way, being very careful not to damage the converter bushing or the pump body. Sometimes it will not come out in one blow, and you will pretty well destroy the old seal in order to get it out. And I've already rolled it up a little bit. So what I'm gonna do, since it's gonna be stubborn, is I'm gonna go along the side of it and beat it down to loosen it from the case, if it'll let me. It may not. Got it worked loose a little bit. The special tools are always handy, but there's always more than one way to skin a cat. As long as you're careful, it can be done. Takes a little more time to do it. We'll go behind it, punch it out, and we've removed the converter seal without hurting the pump body. A good time to check that bushing after you've done that, because you can, just like I did with my chisel, kind of hit that bearing end a little bit. So memory cloth will clean that right up. I'm just trying to clean up this little blemish that we gave it. Get all the metal shavings and some of the dirt out of the pump from dirty fluid and what we just did. It's to that bushing, we just sprayed it down with an aerosol cleaner, and we're blowing it off with compressed air to dry it. Now we're ready to drive our new converter seal in. Set your new seal up there. To drive a seal in, you can get seal drivers, which we have, but in this case we'll demonstrate another method. Simple wood block on top of the seal. Get it pretty well as straight as you can, and then take your hammer and simply give it one good blow. And that seal is pretty much in there. We'll give her one more good blow for good luck. That seal is in there. So we got our pump gears cleaned up. We got our converter seal in. We're going to flip the pump back over. And we're going to reinstall the gears. And we have our punch mark on our driven gear, and it faced up whenever we had it in this position. So we got to reinstall it just as that. Now there are clearance checks for these as well. Clearance check is fine on it, but what you would do is run a feeler gauge in between the driven gear and the case, check clearance that way per your manufacturer's book. This one is okay. And we'll put our driving gear in there, and they fit a certain way, and they feel good. And you can see these little raised portions inside the driving gear. The torque converter comes in there with little notches in it and grabs these and turns that. So when you start your engine, this pump is a-turning in order to provide pressure. Now these surfaces here, they're machined extremely flat. They're extremely perfect. We're close to it. And we want to make sure that they're dry when we reinstall the stator, because you can have slight warpage and then a cross leak, you'll exhaust fluid, and then you may have problems, or you could damage the pump. There, that's out of the way. Next we got our stator. Nothing fancy to it. It's machined quite flat. There's some check balls in here. These check balls here, they will only push out when pump is made a certain amount of pressure, and for flowback purposes. Also, if we spin around, we got a couple little screens just to filter oil. And those look fine. They're not plugged up. And again, these surfaces, they're really flat. They're really true. And they gotta be clean. You see this little blue mark down at the bottom of the stator. Now, this is from the factory. What they did is they heated this part of the shaft and then pressed it deep into the stator support. And then we'll do the opposite. Removal will support the pump. These two channels here are going to line up with these two channels in the pump. That's pump, suction, and discharge. And then drops lower in the stator to the body. Line up our bolt holes. Insert a couple bolts before we set it down. It starts getting a little heavy. And we can install the rest of our bolts. You can torque these bolts to 10 foot-pounds and you should be good. You're not over tightened, you could warp the pump body, cause a cross leak. Now we have these steel rings here. We've got 4 of them. And if you look closely, they're locked together. These are sealing rings that go in the input drum. And you have oil apply holes too, or feed holes. Several of them. You have little slits in it too. These are all oil passages. these steel rings, they get wore and they'll start leaking fluid. They even leak a little bit brand new, but they designed the unit to do that. So we're going to put new rings on it. To get these off, sometimes they can be tricky. I push the ring out on the other end the most that I can, just like so. And then I'll push one end down and it'll unhook. And then we can just spread it with our fingertips, almost like a little piston ring. And we'll do that with the rest of them. And we have 4. Now here we have our new rings, or pump stator rings. The new ones are a different material. They're not steel. They're a different compound. Old ones are steel. These are supposed to seal better due to the fact that there's less of a hole to go through. Like the steel ring, when they're expanded, you see 2 gaping slots on top and the bottom. These, the new rings, will butt together and they will seal better. We're going to install the new rings just like the old ones. And these are a little easier to pull apart since they're not steel. And we have our new rings on. Oops. Now you notice there's a slot in between these 2 channels for these rings. It is possible to put a ring on in the middle, and that would be a problem. It's just a little confusing, but it's kind of rounded at the bottom. It would let you know that it's not fitting right, just to let you know that it can be confusing. And before installation, like the old scarf cut rings that we did on the input shaft, I'm going to stagger these. They most likely won't leak. It's just something I like to do. The further away from a hole I can get them, the better that I feel. And there's our pump.